Welcome back, everyone. In today's video, we're diving into a powerful, suspenseful journey of betrayal, power, and redemption. Meet Blake Ashford, a man who built his empire from the ground up. But little did he know, the same empire he fought so hard to protect would soon be the center of a storm that would shake everything he believed in. He's a man of power, control, and ambition. But at home, things are far from perfect. His wife, Serena, is becoming more distant with every passing day. And when Blake discovers the chilling truth of her betrayal, it sets off a chain of events that will change the course of his life forever. Blake's world crumbles as he unravels a web of lies, deceit, and financial manipulation. But in a game of high stakes, is revenge the only answer? Or will the truth be his most powerful weapon? Stay tuned, because what happens next will leave you on the edge of your seat. This isn't just a story about business or betrayal, it's a story about a man reclaiming his power, and finding his true self amidst the chaos. Will Blake's empire survive, or will the very people he loved destroy everything he's built? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because you won't want to miss a single moment of this gripping tale. Let's dive into Blake's journey. Blake Harrison was the epitome of success. A self-made entrepreneur who built his empire from scratch, Blake lived a life filled with luxury, power, and recognition. His business acumen had earned him respect, but at the cost of his personal life. Despite his impressive achievements, Blake's marriage to his wife Olivia and his relationship with their teenage son, Ethan, were slowly unraveling. Blake's days were consumed with boardroom meetings, business acquisitions, and traveling the world, leaving little room for his family. His wife, Olivia, had grown accustomed to a life of extravagant shopping sprees and lavish parties, while Blake was often absent, buried in the responsibilities of his rapidly growing company. Things between Blake and Olivia had become strained over time. Blake began to notice the subtle signs. Olivia was more distant, spending long hours at the spa, shopping, or attending social events. When she was home, she seemed distracted, and her affection toward him had faded. Blake, ever the workaholic, initially dismissed it. After all, they were living the life they had dreamed of, what could possibly be wrong? But soon, Blake began to see the cracks in their seemingly perfect life. Olivia's spending habits became more erratic, and she started making large withdrawals from their joint account without any clear explanation. Blake's once tight control over their finances began to slip. Blake's suspicions grew when one day, as he came home early from a business trip, he overheard a heated conversation between Olivia and a man named Jack Winters, a personal trainer who had become a frequent presence in Olivia's life. Olivia was speaking in hushed tones, but Blake could hear the unmistakable tone of guilt in her voice. Blake was stunned when he realized Olivia had been seeing Jack behind his back for months. His shock deepened when he overheard Ethan, their 16-year-old son, casually discussing how he had known about the affair and had even helped Olivia keep it a secret. Ethan, who once idolized his father, had been complicit in the lies, participating in their family's growing web of deception. Devastated by the discovery, Blake was determined to know the full extent of the betrayal. He hired a private investigator to follow Olivia and Jack, collecting evidence of their affair and any signs of a larger plan to undermine him. The investigator gathered footage of Olivia and Jack meeting at various high-end locations, having secretive conversations, and even exchanging texts about using Blake's money to fund their plans. Blake also learned that Olivia and Jack had been secretly planning to run off together, taking a substantial portion of Blake's wealth. They were manipulating Ethan, convincing him that his father's rigid lifestyle and work obsession were the real cause of the family's problems. Fueled by anger and betrayal, Blake devised a meticulous plan to expose Olivia and Jack's treachery. He knew they would be attending an exclusive charity gala, a high-profile event filled with influential guests, including business partners and media representatives. This was his chance to reveal the truth to the world. Blake prepared a presentation, compiling the evidence of Olivia's affair, the financial manipulations, and Ethan's involvement. He carefully crafted his speech, determined to not only destroy their facade of a perfect marriage but to reclaim his life and his reputation. The night of the gala arrived. Blake, dressed in a sharp tuxedo, was calm and composed as he entered the venue. Olivia, dressed in an elegant gown, smiled and greeted their guests, oblivious to the storm about to hit. Blake waited until the dinner speeches were over, and then, standing before the guests, he calmly requested the microphone. He introduced himself as the husband of Olivia Harrison and father of Ethan. The crowd went silent as Blake began his speech, showing photos, videos, and financial transactions that proved Olivia's affair with Jack Winters and their plans to steal from him. As the presentation unfolded, Olivia's face turned pale, her eyes wide in disbelief. Jack, who had been sitting in the audience, attempted to leave, but security swiftly detained him. The tension in the room was palpable. Guests watched in stunned silence as Blake revealed the extent of the betrayal. The truth shattered their world. Olivia was publicly humiliated, and her social status crumbled in front of everyone. The once charming image she had carefully cultivated for years was gone. Jack was arrested for fraud and other financial crimes that Blake had uncovered. Ethan, looking on from the back of the room, was devastated. His relationship with his father was on the verge of collapse, and his actions would have far-reaching consequences. After the gala, Blake returned home to face the wreckage of his personal life. Olivia, now estranged, pleaded with Blake to forgive her. But Blake, having seen the depths of her betrayal, had no interest in reconciliation. His once perfect family was shattered, and there was no going back. Blake decided to cut ties with Olivia and Ethan, opting to leave behind the family home and retreat to a quieter life. He wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear: he needed to rebuild himself and his life, free from the chains of deceit and betrayal. As for Ethan, Blake left him with a choice. If Ethan wanted to reconcile, he would have to take responsibility for his actions and prove that he could be trusted again. Blake wasn't angry anymore, but he knew he couldn't forgive so easily. His journey of personal growth had only just begun, and his focus was now on the future, a future where he could live on his own terms, without the weight of betrayal holding him back. After the public fallout from the gala, Blake retreated into a quieter life. He moved out of the luxury penthouse he once shared with Olivia and found a small, modern apartment in a quieter part of the city. It wasn't much, but for the first time in years, Blake felt free. His company had remained strong despite the personal drama, and he dove into his work with renewed passion. He invested in new ventures and strengthened relationships with old business partners, but something was missing. While he had regained control of his professional life, the gaping hole in his personal life was harder to ignore. For weeks, Blake wrestled with his emotions. He still couldn't understand how his marriage had crumbled so quickly, or how his own son had turned against him. Blake had always thought he could provide everything for his family: wealth, security, and stability, but in the end, it wasn't enough to hold them together. Blake had come to a realization: it wasn't just about success anymore. It was about rebuilding trust, and maybe, just maybe, learning to trust himself again. Blake had not heard from Ethan since the gala. After the embarrassing revelation of Ethan's involvement, Blake knew their relationship was fractured, but it pained him to see his son drift away. He had always thought Ethan was different. He was the one thing Blake could rely on, the one part of his life that wasn't tainted by greed or dishonesty. But that was before Blake learned of Ethan's complicity in the lies. At first, Blake had felt betrayed, but now, he saw something else: Ethan was a victim in his own way. Ethan had grown up in a world of luxury, surrounded by wealth and materialism, and Blake realized that his son had never learned the value of hard work and integrity. He had been conditioned to see life as a series of transactions, not relationships. Still, Blake was reluctant to reach out to Ethan. It wasn't just about what his son had done, it was about what Blake had failed to see. He had neglected Ethan in favor of his career, and that was a mistake Blake could not ignore. But Blake's phone buzzed one afternoon. It was a message from Ethan. "Dad, can we talk?" I need to explain myself. Please. Blake met Ethan at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. Ethan looked different, older, more mature, but there was still a sadness in his eyes that Blake couldn't ignore. I know you're angry with me, Ethan began, his voice thick with emotion. But you don't understand. I thought if I helped Mom, it would make everything better. I was just trying to keep the family together. I didn't want you to leave. Blake's heart softened, but the anger was still there, lingering in the background. By lying to me? By helping her tear everything apart? Blake said, his voice harsh. You're my son, Ethan. I raised you better than that. I know, Dad, I know, Ethan said, his voice cracking. I was confused. I didn't know who to trust anymore. I felt like I was losing everything, and I thought maybe Mom was right, maybe you weren't the father I needed. Maybe she had a point about everything. Blake felt the sting of those words, but he knew that was part of Ethan's confusion. It wasn't just Olivia's betrayal, it was everything Blake had failed to notice. He had built his empire on the idea of success, but in the process, he had neglected the one thing that mattered most, the people he loved. Blake leaned forward, his voice calmer now. Ethan, I failed you. I thought I could give you everything by providing for you. But I didn't see that you needed me. I was so caught up in my own success, I didn't realize you were drifting away. And for that, I'm sorry. Ethan looked up, a tear escaping from his eye. You still love me, don't you? Blake nodded, his voice soft. Of course, I do. But love isn't enough, Ethan. It's about trust. And we have a lot of work to do to rebuild that. In the months that followed, Blake and Ethan worked hard to mend their relationship. It wasn't easy, and there were many difficult conversations, but Blake began to see the changes in his son. Ethan started attending therapy, and Blake made sure to spend more time with him, even if it meant stepping back from his business ventures for a while. Meanwhile, Blake had also begun to heal. He hired a personal coach to help him confront the deep-rooted pain of his past, learning to navigate his own feelings of betrayal and abandonment. Slowly, Blake found a sense of balance between his personal and professional lives. As Blake and Ethan grew closer, the shadow of Olivia and her betrayal began to fade. Blake had forgiven his son, but he had no intention of reconciling with Olivia. He had learned the hard way that some relationships, no matter how much you try to fix them, were beyond repair. Blake was determined to move forward, not just for himself, but for Ethan, too. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but for the first time in a long time, Blake felt ready to face them. Blake had been slowly rebuilding his life, but the peace he had fought so hard for was not meant to last long. Just when he thought things were settling down, a new challenge arose. His company, Ashford Enterprises, was facing an unexpected threat. A rival tech conglomerate, led by a mysterious businessman named Victor Hayes, was attempting a hostile takeover. Victor had been keeping a low profile in the business world, but his sudden rise to power seemed calculated. Rumors started to swirl that he had inside information about Blake's company, and Blake suspected there was more to this than just business rivalry. Blake knew he needed to act fast to protect everything he had worked for. The stress was overwhelming, but he also knew this was a battle he could not afford to lose. The stakes were higher than ever before, not just for his empire, but for Ethan and the future he was trying to build. While Blake was fighting on the business front, Ethan was still grappling with his own demons. Although they had made strides in repairing their relationship, Ethan was far from healed. His betrayal of his father still weighed heavily on him, and he was trying to reconcile with his own identity. Blake had given him the space to grow, but Ethan often felt like an outsider in his own life. One evening, after a long day of meetings and negotiations, Blake found Ethan in his apartment, looking troubled. The young man had been quiet for weeks, and Blake knew something was weighing on him. "Ethan, what's going on?" Blake asked, sitting beside him. Ethan hesitated, then sighed. "I've been getting calls. From Olivia. Blake's stomach turned at the mention of his ex-wife. It had been months since the gala, and he had moved on, or so he thought. But Olivia's shadow still loomed over them. She wants to talk. She says she's sorry, that she was wrong about everything. But I don't know. I don't want to get caught up in her mess again, Dad. Blake felt a knot in his chest. He had told Ethan to stay away from Olivia, but this was a conversation they needed to have. Ethan, I know you're hurting, but you have to understand something. Olivia is dangerous, not just to me, but to you. She's a master manipulator. You're not obligated to fix her mess. Your life is your own now. Ethan nodded, but Blake could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He knew his son still craved the approval and love that Olivia had once promised. It was a hard battle to fight, especially when the past continued to haunt them. As the weeks passed, Blake focused on outmaneuvering Victor Hayes and his company, but the pressure was relentless. Then, unexpectedly, an ally emerged, Zara Winters, a former business partner who had once been a close friend of Blake's. Zara had disappeared from the business world for several years after a scandal involving a failed merger, but she was back, and she had a proposition. I've been watching you, Blake, Zara said, sitting across from him in his office. You're being targeted, and it's not just Victor Hayes. There are others behind the scenes, pulling strings. People who want to see you fail. Blake was taken aback. Why come to me now? What's in it for you? Zara smiled, but there was something cold in her eyes. I've got my own reasons. But I'm here to help. I know how Victor operates, and I know how to fight back. Blake was cautious, but he couldn't afford to turn away any potential allies. Zara's knowledge of the corporate world and her connections could be invaluable. She was a wild card, but sometimes, Blake thought, a little unpredictability was exactly what he needed. As Blake and Zara dug deeper into the business dealings of Victor Hayes, they uncovered something disturbing. Victor had a mole inside Ashford Enterprises. Someone within his own company was leaking information, and Blake's empire was under attack from the inside out. Blake was furious. He trusted his employees, and the idea that someone was betraying him sent waves of anger through him. But who could it be? His loyal assistant, Chloe? His long-time CFO, Greg? Or was it someone closer to him than he realized? Blake couldn't afford to waste time. He needed to act quickly to uncover the traitor and prevent the hostile takeover from succeeding. But as he began to investigate, he realized that the mole was someone he had trusted for years, Greg. Greg had been siphoning off money from the company's accounts, slowly but surely, feeding Victor Hayes information, and undermining Blake's control. It was a devastating blow. Blake confronted Greg in a tense meeting. You've betrayed me, Greg. You've been working with Victor this whole time. Greg looked calm, almost too calm. You don't get it, Blake. This isn't personal. It's business. You were too focused on your empire, too blind to see that I was the one who built it with you. I was the one who kept things running while you were out playing the role of the successful businessman. I deserve more. Blake's jaw clenched. You were never a partner, Greg. You were a tool. And now you'll pay the price for it. Greg smirked. You can't stop what's coming, Blake. Victor will take everything from you. With Greg's betrayal exposed, Blake went into full battle mode. He rallied his remaining loyal staff, worked with Zara to prepare for the corporate war ahead, and began to fight back against Victor's assault. It was a race against time, and Blake knew he had to win this fight, not just for his company, but for himself and Ethan. The final confrontation came at a high-stakes shareholder meeting, where Victor Hayes was poised to take control of Ashford Enterprises. Blake had gathered every shred of evidence against Victor's illegal activities, including Greg's involvement, and he was ready to strike. As the meeting unfolded, Blake stood up and delivered a speech that sent shockwaves through the room. Victor Hayes is nothing more than a criminal. He's been using deceit and manipulation to try and take control of this company. And I have the proof to expose him. With Zara's help, Blake presented the evidence, financial records, emails, phone calls, everything that tied Victor to Greg and his underhanded schemes. The room erupted in chaos, but it was too late for Victor. Security escorted him out, and the hostile takeover was stopped in its tracks. In the aftermath of the battle, Blake's empire was intact. He had exposed the betrayal from within, defeated Victor Hayes, and secured his place at the helm of Ashford Enterprises once again. But for Blake, the real victory was not in the business world, it was in his relationship with Ethan. Ethan had been by his side throughout the entire ordeal, and as they stood together, watching the final chapter of the corporate war unfold, Blake realized that the healing between them was finally complete. "I'm proud of you, Dad," Ethan said, his voice steady. "You did it. We did it." Blake smiled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "We're not just rebuilding a company, Ethan. We're rebuilding our lives." Blake stood in front of the glass windows of his high-rise office, looking out over the city. The skyline was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, a symbol of the empire he had fought so hard to protect. Yet, despite his victory over Victor Hayes and Greg's betrayal, Blake knew the battle wasn't over. There was a chill in the air, something Blake could sense but couldn't fully understand. He had beaten one opponent, but that only meant more would come. And this time, they wouldn't be so easy to see. Blake had learned a valuable lesson: when you're at the top, everyone wants a piece of you, whether they deserve it or not. He had no illusions about his power or his enemies. As much as he wanted to believe he was in control, Blake knew he was walking a tightrope, and one wrong move could send him plummeting. Ethan was finally starting to feel like he was finding his way again. After the chaos surrounding Blake's battle with Victor Hayes, he had immersed himself in his own work. He had joined a startup company with a friend of his from college, a place where he could rebuild his own identity outside of his father's shadow. Blake supported his decision, though there was an unspoken tension between them. The distance between father and son had begun to feel more pronounced. Blake wasn't sure whether Ethan was simply trying to prove something to himself, or if there was something more, something deeper, lingering between them. One evening, Blake invited Ethan to dinner at his apartment. They hadn't spent much time together lately, and Blake wanted to reconnect. "Ethan, how's the startup going?" Blake asked as they sat down at the dinner table, the dim light creating a sense of warmth and intimacy. "It's good," Ethan replied, his voice hesitant. "But I'm not sure I want to do this forever. I think I need something more. You know." Blake paused, setting his fork down. "More?" Ethan looked up, meeting his father's gaze. "Yeah, like, maybe taking on more responsibility. I don't want to be in your shadow forever." Blake felt a pang in his chest. "Ethan, you don't have to do anything to prove yourself to me. But if you want to build something real, something you can call your own, you'll have to take some risks." Ethan looked at him, considering his words. The conversation was a turning point for both of them. Blake knew Ethan needed to make his own way, but he also understood how dangerous that path could be. There was no safety net anymore. Meanwhile, back in the world of Ashford Enterprises, new rumors began to circulate. A shadowy figure had begun quietly investing in tech startups, pouring vast amounts of money into companies that seemed to have little potential. Blake's company, of course, was not immune to such maneuvers. Blake received a cryptic message one afternoon from an unknown number. It was a simple line: "You don't know who you're up against this time. But you'll find out soon enough." Blake's instincts flared. The last thing he needed was another anonymous enemy. But the more he dug into the mysterious investor, the more he realized that this was no ordinary threat. The investor's targets were not random, they were strategically chosen. The tech startups in which the investor was pouring money were all companies that directly competed with Ashford Enterprises. But there was something even more unsettling: the timing. Blake couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a corporate rival trying to capitalize on his weakness, this felt personal. Blake turned to Zara for help. "Do you know anyone who could be behind this?" Zara leaned forward, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. "There's a name that comes to mind. Sophia Grant. She's an investor, but she's not like the others. She has a reputation for manipulating the markets from the shadows. She's always playing a long game." Blake's blood ran cold. Sophia Grant. The name echoed in his mind, stirring memories of a time long past. She had been a former associate of his, someone he had trusted years ago. But their parting had been ugly, full of betrayal and unfinished business. "This isn't just about business," Blake said, his voice low. "It's personal." As Blake and Zara delved deeper into Sophia's activities, they discovered something chilling. Sophia wasn't just investing in companies to disrupt Ashford Enterprises. She was building something much bigger, an alliance of investors with ties to government officials, former associates of Blake's, and even members of organized crime. Her ultimate goal wasn't just to take down Ashford Enterprises, it was to take down Blake personally. She wanted to dismantle everything he had built, strip him of his empire, and leave him with nothing. Blake felt the walls closing in. He had fought hard for everything he had, but this time, the enemy was playing a much more dangerous game. There were no rules. There was no honor. Only destruction. But Blake wasn't one to back down. He had come too far to let someone like Sophia take everything from him. He needed to play her game, but on his own terms. Blake set a trap. With Zara's help, he managed to turn the tables on Sophia, planting false information that would lure her into a vulnerable position. He knew she would take the bait. Sophia couldn't resist the urge to secure her power. The plan was set in motion at a high-profile gala, an event that Sophia would undoubtedly attend. Blake had arranged for her to meet with a confidential informant, who would feed her the false information that would ultimately lead to her downfall. As the night unfolded, Blake watched from the shadows, waiting for the moment when he would reveal the truth to the world. But just as he was about to make his move, something unexpected happened. Sophia had anticipated his every move. A voice behind him whispered, "You thought you could outsmart me, Blake." Blake spun around, his heart racing. It was Sophia. She had been one step ahead the entire time. The tension in the air was palpable as Blake and Sophia stood face to face in the middle of the crowded gala. The guests, oblivious to the dangerous game unfolding beneath their feet, continued to mingle, unaware of the storm about to break. "I warned you, Blake," Sophia said, her smile cold. "You should have walked away when you had the chance. Now, it's too late." Blake knew he had been played. But he also knew one thing, he wasn't going down without a fight. "I didn't come this far just to let you destroy everything. If this is how you want it, then let's see who the real mastermind is." The final showdown between Blake and Sophia was more than just a battle for control of Ashford Enterprises. It was a war of wills, a test of their resolve. Blake's every move was calculated, but so was Sophia's. In the end, it wasn't just about power, it was about survival. Blake leaned back in his chair, staring at the cold, flickering screen of his computer. He had thought he had everything under control. Sophia Grant had been a ghost, a silent predator in the shadows of his empire, but the tables had turned. The false information he'd planted had been a clever ruse, or so he thought. Yet now, everything was laid bare before him. The board meeting was just an hour away, and Blake could already feel the weight of the world pressing on his shoulders. Sophia had anticipated his every move, but she hadn't seen this coming. Blake had secured an anonymous tip about a significant flaw in one of Sophia's deals, an investment she had made with a foreign government that could end up being disastrous. It was a risky play, but Blake knew that if he exposed it at the right moment, he could not only ruin Sophia but also expose her manipulative web to the world. The meeting with the board was coming up, and Blake had one final chance to take back control. Blake entered the grand boardroom, his mind racing but his demeanor calm. The sleek, polished table was surrounded by the most powerful people in the room, individuals who could make or break empires with a single vote. As Blake took his seat at the head of the table, his eyes met those of Sophia, who was sitting across from him. There was no smile this time. Instead, her eyes burned with a quiet, deadly intensity. She knew this was the final round. "We'll begin with the update on the company's finances," Blake said, his voice steady as he addressed the room. He glanced at his assistant, who promptly handed him the folder with the latest reports. But just before he began presenting, he stopped. "There's something more important we need to discuss," Blake said, locking eyes with Sophia. "I have just received some disturbing news that affects not only our company but your entire investment portfolio, Sophia." The room fell silent. Blake continued, "You see, Sophia, while you've been busy manipulating the market and undermining Ashford Enterprises, you've overlooked one thing, your own vulnerability." Sophia's face remained stoic, but Blake could tell she was starting to sweat. With a calculated move, Blake slid a folder in front of him and opened it, revealing a series of documents and photos. "This," he said, his finger pointing to the screen, "is evidence of a botched deal you made with a foreign government, one that's about to implode. You've been funneling money through companies with no real assets, using our markets as a front to cover your tracks. I'm guessing your investors won't be too happy when they learn about this." Sophia's eyes widened. The entire room was now paying attention, and her power was slipping away. Blake pressed on. "I don't know if you thought you could escape this, but I'm not letting you take down Ashford Enterprises with you. You'll be exposed, and everything you've worked for will be destroyed." The silence in the room was deafening. Blake could see the tension building, but he wasn't done. He had one more piece of the puzzle to reveal. He turned to the board members, each of them looking at Sophia with doubt now in their eyes. "I have documents here, showing how you used personal connections within our organization to manipulate stock prices, all while siphoning off company funds. If this ever went public, it would destroy your career and the investors who've supported you." Sophia's face turned pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Blake stood, his back straight, his eyes never leaving her. "Your time is up, Sophia. I'll make sure that justice is served." In the weeks that followed, Sophia's empire crumbled. The SEC launched an investigation into her dealings, and her connections to international corruption were exposed in a way that no one could ignore. As her name and reputation went up in flames, Blake's victory was hard-fought but undeniable. But while Sophia's downfall felt sweet, Blake knew that it wasn't just about winning. The bigger victory was in reclaiming control over his own life, his business, and his son. In the aftermath of the battle, Ethan came to Blake with a decision that had been weighing on him for months. "Dad, I've been thinking," Ethan started, his voice hesitant. "I want to take the reins of Ashford Enterprises. I've been learning, and I think I'm ready to help lead the company." Blake looked at his son, a mix of pride and concern flooding his chest. This moment was monumental. Ethan had always been distant, almost as if he was avoiding taking his place beside Blake. But now, Blake realized that Ethan was no longer running away from his legacy, he was embracing it. "I'm proud of you, Ethan," Blake said, his voice steady. "But are you ready for the weight of everything that comes with it? It's not just about the power or the wealth. It's about making decisions that could change the lives of thousands of people." Ethan nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I know. But I've learned from the best. And I'm ready to fight for it." Blake smiled faintly, a sense of peace washing over him. Perhaps it was time to hand over the reins, at least partially, and let Ethan shape the future. With Sophia's fall, Blake felt a weight lift off his shoulders. But he knew the world of power and business was never truly predictable. As one chapter closed, another opened. And this time, he wasn't alone. He had Ethan by his side, Zara still at his side as his most trusted advisor, and the future was filled with possibilities. Blake had learned that power wasn't just about controlling everything around him, it was about making the right decisions when it mattered most, and ensuring that those he loved would thrive, no matter the cost. The road ahead was uncertain, but Blake was ready to face whatever came next. With Ethan's newfound resolve, and Blake's unyielding determination, they were poised to not only rebuild Ashford Enterprises, but to build something even greater, together. And as Blake stepped into the future, he realized one thing: this wasn't just about winning battles, it was about building a legacy that would last for generations. Wow, what a ride! Blake Ashford's journey has been full of twists, turns, and revelations that none of us saw coming. From betrayal to the ultimate revenge, he's proven that sometimes, the best way to reclaim your life is by taking control of your destiny. But what happens next for Blake? Will he truly find peace, or is this just the beginning of something even bigger? The truth is, Blake's story isn't just about revenge, it's about finding your strength when everything seems lost. And as we've seen, every decision he made was a step towards creating a new world for himself. But what about Serena, and the others involved in his downfall? The story may be over for now, but there are still many unanswered questions, and many more challenges ahead. Do you think Blake will continue to rise from the ashes, or will the past continue to haunt him? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think about Blake's journey and what you expect for the next chapter of his life. And if you enjoyed today's story, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Hit the notification bell so you'll be the first to know when our next video drops. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care, and remember, sometimes, the most unexpected journeys lead to the most incredible destinations.